Hi everyone, Gene here. Welcome to the Tapping Q&A podcast, where every single week we answer the most common and uncommon questions about tapping so you can get the most out of your tapping practice and eliminate self-sabotage in your life. If you would like a free 10-part guide on how you can use tapping to eliminate that self-sabotage, all you need to do is go to tappingqa.com, click on the big blue button, and we will send you audios, videos, tapping instructions every single day for 10 days, arriving in your inbox absolutely free. Tappingqa.com, click on the big blue button. If you happen to be listening to this right now in the website, all you need to do is go up in that right-hand column, click on the blue button up there, and you will get the free guide. This is Gene Monterostelli, and welcome to the Tapping Q&A podcast, recorded live to tape from Williamsburg in Brooklyn. This is episode 357, originally aired April 3rd, 2019. Hi, everyone. I hope this finds you well wherever you are and whatever time of day you're getting a chance to listen to this. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Today, we have a conversation about cognitive behavior therapy and how it compares and contrasts and can complement the tapping that you are already doing. And you might be surprised that you're actually using a number of CBT techniques and you don't even realize it. If you didn't listen to last week's episode 356, we have a great conversation with Peter Stapleton talking about research around the scientific proof that tapping works and what we know and what we have learned and how you can use that information to be more effective in your tapping practice. She has a new book called The Science of Tapping, which you can get information about by going to tappingqa.com/science. Or if you want to hear our interview where she is talking about the research, just go to tappingqa.com/356. Or if you go to tappingpodcast.com, go into the archives where we have over 170 hours of free content. Click on episode 356 to hear that conversation with PETA so you can get the most out of your tapping practice. Over the course of the last number of weeks, every single week we've been taking some time. Thank our listeners all over the world for listening to the Tapping Q&A podcast. And we've been naming all of the countries since the first of the year that have downloaded podcasts. Today, I want to send a special thanks to the folks in Poland, Philippines, Austria, Romania, Dominican Republic, and Indonesia. Thanks for making tapping a part of your day. If you know someone in the world who could use tapping as a way to improve their life, please be our ambassador. Pass the podcast along to someone else, because if other people are tapping, they are healthier. When they are healthier, that healthiness ripples out and it makes the world a better place. My personal goal for this calendar year is every single day to get 9 more people listening to the podcast and tapping more, because if we do that over the course of the year, 3,000 more people will be tapping. 3,000 might not seem a lot, but if we have 3,000 people in a healthier place, every community they are in, every relationship they have, every interaction they have is going to be healthier. And that's going to be a force that's really powerful in the world. So please do us a favor, continue to share the podcast with your loved ones. So today I have a conversation with Joan Kaylor. Joan is someone who has been tapping for a really long time, and she's also someone who's been using CBT for a really long time, cognitive behavior therapy. And a number of weeks ago, I received an email from one of my listeners, just like you, who said, I would love to hear a conversation about CBT. It is something that is really at the front of people's consciousness right now. It is a therapy that is seen to be very, very effective. In many countries around the world, there are medical organizations that push people towards CBT first because they think it is so effective. And so I think it's good for us to be able to understand what is out there and how we can benefit from that with our tapping. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, you might be surprised that you're actually using a number of the CBT techniques and thinking in that way just because it is so integral to some of our tapping. So here is my conversation with Joan about how we can understand CBT in a way that is going to help us get more out of our tapping. What is cognitive behavior therapy? We hear it talked about a lot. It's to the point that it's really in the present consciousness.
It's a buzzword.
But I always want to be in a circumstance that whenever we're talking about something, we have clear definitions so we're all on the same page. So as someone who uses it and trained it, what is the definition in your mind?
Cognitive behavior therapy is about changing a person's thoughts.
Okay.
Because what they think leads to their behavior and their choices and their decisions.
Right.
If their choices and decisions are not what they want them to be, then they need to change their thinking.
Okay.
And that is the challenge with traditional cognitive behavior therapy, to help someone change their thinking.
And so as someone who is just using that tool set in a vacuum, what does that look like? How are you going about in identifying thoughts, and how are you then transforming those thoughts into new thoughts?
I listen to my client, listen to their thinking process, listening to the words that come out of their mouth. I write them down. And then after they tell their story, after they take a pause, I say, I wonder if you are aware of what you just said. I wonder if what you just said has any bearing on the circumstance that you're in now, or the behavior that you're doing now that you don't want to do. And they go, oh, I never thought about it like that. Or they say, yes, I am aware, but I don't know how to stop thinking that way.
And I think what's really interesting inside of that, and from a different set of training that I've gone through with meta modeling and NLP, one of the things that we had talked about a lot is we respond to the world in the way that we describe it with our words.
Yes.
And oftentimes we don't realize the very simple generalization that we might use in our vocabulary. Everybody at work hates me. Well, if I say that out loud, and that's the way I'm interpreting the circumstance, then I'm going to walk in the door in a very specific way, whether or not that statement is true. So in cognitive behavior therapy, when you identify with a client a thought that is unhelpful or untrue, yes, we can identify it, and sometimes that's often not enough to transform it. What then is the process that starts unraveling that or transforming it?
I say, show me the proof that that's true.
Okay.
So you think this way, or have all or nothing thinking. I always think this. I always feel this. That never happens. The always and never are two extremes.
Yep.
And nothing is always or never.
Right.
It's always... It's usually in the middle somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those things that, at least in my own experience, I found that it is having nuanced thought takes energy and it takes time. And as we live in a more stressed and overwhelmed times, and as we're packing our lives more and more, it's almost easier to turn everything into a binary, because then it doesn't take any energy throughout the day for me to think. I can give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down. It's a good or it's a bad. It's a yes or a no. And that makes it easier for me to navigate things. And as you're saying, there's subtlety and nuance to almost everything, which makes it really hard for us to operate in a world from these binaries when that's not actually how we understand things.
When I say, what proof do you have that this is true? Someone will either stop and think, or they'll say, this is the proof. And then I will say, let's test that.
Right.
They will say, how do I test that? And I will say, okay, the person, place, situation, let's just have a virtual thought process here. Go into that situation, and then you will carry that forward with you in your life after we have this virtual thought process.
Right.
And then I might say, well, what if you thought about it this way, or said this instead of that? Now, this is strictly cognitive behavior therapy.
Right.
Right. we haven't gone into the juicy parts of this.
Absolutely. Yeah. And what I'm just trying to do is I'm just trying to create a foundation so it's easy for us to start adding all the extra stuff to it. So in that, again, just in that setting, before we add any other tool set to that, I certainly know that there are cases in which I will have a thought that intellectually I understand is not true, but it is still a thought that persists, that creates behavior out of it. Mm-hmm. And I can be in a situation where intellectually I can say, there is no proof that that thought is true, but simply recognizing the fact that it's not true and there's no proof behind it is still not enough to unseat it.
Then we go to the next level, which is emotion behind the thought, because that's what gets it stuck. You have the thought and you go, what's the about? Is it fear, guilt, anger? Whatever emotion is attached to that thought is the reason that you can't change the thought.
Could you give a practical example maybe that might be helpful?
Okay. If someone says, it really makes me angry when my partner doesn't listen to me.
Okay.
That anger is what is attached to my partner is not listening to me. Now, maybe the partner is so sick of hearing whatever this person is saying that they're tuning them out.
Right.
Like, you've told me this 532 times, enough already. So then we have to break that apart and say, well, what are they doing when you're talking? And what are you doing? What are the circumstances around this communication? Let's look at how they're responding, which is making you angry. Let's look at how you're delivering your message, which is frustrating you and making you angry because they're not listening. We need to look at your communication skills. I'm not saying there's no right, there's no wrong in this. There's no I'm right, he's wrong, or I'm right, she's wrong. It's none of that. We need to break this apart into smaller pieces to see what's going on with the communication. And when you understand the way your communication is being delivered and they are receiving it, perhaps the anger will disappear. Perhaps you will have a new awareness of the situation. Perhaps a cognitive shift will occur that says, oh, maybe I should wait until he or she has had a chance to relax when they walk in the door and get something to eat, something to drink, and then approach them with this 15 minutes later, half an hour later, when they are more rested, when they are more likely to hear me, instead of pouncing on them when they walk through the door.
So what it sounds like you're saying is we're identifying what the emotion is. We're identifying the reason why we're having that emotion. And then in this setting, what we want to do is we want to create a different response so we're not operating out of that emotion, because the emotion is I'm not being heard. And so I'm angry because I am not being heard. So the question then becomes, how do I put myself in a position where it's easier for me to be heard, which means the anger isn't going to show up, which means I might be able to have a more constructive conversation.
Bingo.
Excellent.
Correct.
So in just your experience in your training, when and how were you introduced to cognitive behavior therapy?
Actually, when I joined way long ago, when the dinosaurs were walking the earth back in the 90s, I was a member of the International Obsessive Compulsive Disorders Foundation. I took their first Behavior Therapy Institute training in 1996. All along, mind you, I'd been going to the conferences since 91. Learning. And then that workshop, that 3-day seminar, plus the ensuing supervision by my mentor, because we were each assigned a mentor, that really solidified cognitive behavior therapy for me. I was a student of CBT long before it was the buzzword of counseling. So I knew how to take obsessive compulsive disorder, the unwanted thoughts, the unwanted images, the sensations, however that presented itself. I learned how to listen, understand, and take that apart, just as I'm describing now. So I credit the International OCD Foundation for teaching me cognitive behavior therapy, because they are really, that's where I started.
Awesome. That's great. And then when was your introduction and connection into the various forms of tapping?
That was back in 1996. I have been a student of tapping since 1996. My then supervisor took a course from Fred Gallo, who is a pioneer and the gentleman who coined the term energy psychology. So Dawn took a class from Fred. Then he came back and said, I'm really interested in this. So then he went out and studied under Roger Callahan, thought field therapy. He came back and said, this is really cool stuff. He introduced me to as much as he was allowed to at that time, because thought field therapy was very proprietary.
Right.
I started practicing it, and the more I used it, the faster my clients got results and the more excited I became. So fast forward 23 years, I joined the Association for Comprehensive Energy Psychology. I took every course that they had to offer. I became certified in energy psychology. I became certified from Tina Craig in the gold standard of emotional freedom techniques. I went up to New York City and studied under Fred Gallo. I am a sponge. Anything to do with EFT, I soak it in.
And so then inside of that process, so now that you have these two tools in your work today, what does that look like? Are you doing one technique? Are you then switching to the other technique? Are they laying over the top of each other? Kind of in a practical application, how does one inform the other and how do they connect to each other?
Emotional freedom techniques is a combination of cognitive behavior therapy, tapping on acupressure points, and neurolinguistic programming. It's all three. One cannot really divide it. You can't do EFT without cognitive behavior therapy, because the language comes along with tapping. It's not just let's tap on these points and your problem is going to go away. That's not how it works. So the three systems are integrated with each other.
And I guess this is just the way I think of these things. And please, if you disagree with this, for me, like as you say that, the way I kind of break it up inside of my mind is the tuning in and tapping is a mechanical process that we have seen. And for those who listened last week, we spent a lot of time talking about the science of tapping and what we've learned from that. And the NLP and the cognitive behavior therapy is almost like the art of delivery, which gives us the ability to focus in more specifically so that as we are tapping, we are more specific. Because if we're in a circumstance where, because I've been very successful in just tapping on, I feel angry, I feel angry, I feel angry. That's just me pointing something out. There's not a lot of subtlety and nuance.
Right.
But as we talked about in the example about anger in our partner, the way that we were able to get specific about what is causing the anger, what is the reframe inside of that, it allows us to move a lot quicker. What is your thought in kind of framing it that way?
Thank you. Because tapping on the points can certainly help relax a person, but that's global tapping. That's not specific tapping.
Right.
One isn't going to be as effective in global tapping. As a matter of fact, you're not really going to release your problem. The more specific you get, the better the results.
And so it's almost as if, and what you're describing here is we're moving away from symptom to root cause. The deeper that we get, that the less specific we are, we will be able possibly and probably to be able to find relief in this moment, where when we're diving deeper into the types of examples that you were talking about, where we're breaking apart the thoughts and the feelings, we're not only providing relief in the moment, but we're actually getting the opportunity to change the pattern that is inside of the brain, that this is my experience in the world, which before produced this thought and produced this emotion. Since I'm changing that chain and those connections, I no longer have the experience. Since the thought doesn't show up, the emotion doesn't show up. Therefore, I don't have the symptom in the moment.
Bingo. Exactly. many of my clients will say, well, I don't know how it started. So as I've been taught, we go with the energy.
Mm-hmm.
We start tapping on whatever is coming up for them at the moment. As we begin to tap, the layers of the onion start to peel back. I have this one client who is unbelievable. I don't know how this came up, but somehow she was able to tune into something that happened when she was 6 weeks old on an abandonment issue. We did surrogate tapping on the 6-month-old baby. And that allowed her to release that one table leg being the leg of the table that's holding up on top of the table whatever the thought is, whatever the belief is. So if it's, I'm not worthy, I don't deserve, I always feel abandoned, what are the legs that are holding up that table? To be able to go back, this was truly for her mind to feel safe enough to bring up that possibility. And I said, maybe it happened, maybe it didn't, but the fact that you're aware of it means that it's a tappable event.
Absolutely. Yeah. So a couple of things inside of there that I really, really love. The first is, and I've seen this as well with my own clients, is because people get really frustrated. Well, I just have this emotion. It's hard for me to be specific. What you've demonstrated is as we start tapping and as we start releasing that symptom, it's almost like mist melting away in the morning where I can see the backyard clearer and clearer, where we start with the thing that we can be most specific about, which is just an emotion maybe. And as we do that, we're able to release some and we get some clarity. We were able to release some, we get some clarity, and all of a sudden we find our way to this issue.
Right.
The other thing that I love that you shared in there was, and it was a phrase that you said very casually that came and went, and it said, it might have happened or it might not. I think it's really important for us to recognize that as we're bringing up information when we're tapping, sometimes it is literal and sometimes it is metaphorical, but the story is important. At this moment in time, it doesn't matter if she was actually abandoned at 6 weeks, but the way that she is framing her experience that is impacting her today is, I have the story when I was young and defenseless, I was abandoned, therefore the world is unsafe. And so it gives this really great entry point for us to do this work. So when that sort of stuff comes up, we're able to go, awesome, this is useful. And if it happened explicitly like that or not is less important than the fact that we get to transform this piece that was there.
Exactly. Real or not real, it's the energy of the experience that this person is having. So then we remove that one. And then she goes, oh, and now I remember this. And now I remember this. I'm writing down all these situations and I say, beautiful, they're tappable. The more events we clear, we don't necessarily have to tap on every 1 billion events that have happened in your life. But the more events we clear, then others will follow systematically.
Absolutely. Yeah. I always kind of think about this work kind of like water running under sandstone. At a certain point, as we just keep, it looks like it's still a full rock, but the integrity from the inside is being diminished. And at a certain point, it just crumbles away without us having to deal with every single part of that thing that is there, because there's no longer enough support for us to manage it in that way.
Yes.
So for someone who is not in a situation where they are a licensed professional like yourself, and they're not in a situation where they're going to be able to go away for 3 days and really immerse themselves in cognitive behavior therapy, for an average tapper who isn't necessarily looking to work at clients, but is just trying to utilize this tool set because, as you said, it's so knit into the fabric of those of us who've learned tapping without even realizing we've been learning some of these principles. How should someone go about refining and recognizing this stuff so they're able to get more out of their tapping practice?
Right. Start what Gary Craig coined the personal peace procedure, which is anytime you have a thought, write it down. That way you don't lose it. And then as you write it down, say, How am I feeling about this right now? What intensity of emotion comes up for me?
Mm-hmm.
Whether you want to do small, medium, or large, or whether you want to do a scale of 0 to 10 or 0 to 100, 0 being none at all, 10 being the most, 100 being the most. Rate it at that moment that you write it down as your subjective units of distress, or if you want to call it intensity of the emotion.
Mm-hmm.
That way, when you're tapping on it, you will be able to tell if it gets lower and lower and lower, if you get more and more relaxed, if you have a hard time even bringing up. In EFT land, testing is so important. But for people to get the best results, the emotion that comes with the event, and also be aware that you will start out with one thought, one emotion, and it will daisy chain into another thought, another emotion. And this is perfectly normal for tapping. Write it down. The first thing you need to do is start with the emotion that comes up, with the energy that comes up. And then as you daisy chain into another one, write it down so you can go back to the original emotion and make sure that is clear before you start on the next emotion or the next intensity.
And so I guess there's two things in there again that I grabbed that are really important. One is how simple it is if we are willing to just start listening to our thoughts and just paying attention. And I've certainly found in my own life that the more conscious I am about paying attention to my own thoughts, the easier it is in the future for me to start hearing my own thoughts. So I think of it at this time of year, back home where I grew up, meadowlarks are just starting to show up, and it is the sign of spring, their particular call. And the instant I notice the first meadowlark song, I start to notice them more and more and more, because it's almost like I've flipped that little switch saying, listen, pay attention, this is spring. Mm-hmm. And with our own thoughts, when we're in a situation where we start consciously grabbing them and just evaluating whether or not they're true and paying attention to them, it becomes easier and easier for us to start paying attention to them, which makes unseating them easier to do because they're becoming more and more at the front of our mind. The other thing that I love in what you said there is writing things down and making sure we're not just chasing from thought to thought to thought to thought. Because if we're doing that, then we might just be skimming across the surface of 8 or 10 issues, which isn't going to make a significant difference. But as we're working on something new comes up, we capture it, then we go back to the original thing to make sure we've cleared that original thing. And as new thoughts keep coming up and then going back to evaluate those chain of thoughts, then we're going to be moving forward in a way that creates true transformation, not just something that is superficial in the moment.
Correct. I love writing things down. Thoughts come to us when we least expect them. If we think, oh, I have to write something down, we block it. But if we're in the car, don't write anything down when you're in the car, by the way.
Of course.
If a thought comes, or if you're watching TV, if you're working on something and a thought pops into your mind, if you're cooking, if you're gardening, if you're taking a walk, the best way for thoughts to come to us is when we're outside taking a walk on the beach, when we're doing our grounding, when we're taking in fresh air, when we're around nature. Thoughts will definitely come up.
And what I do when I'm in those circumstances, I live here in New York City, and so I'm constantly on foot moving from place to place, is when thoughts come up, I literally just step out of the sidewalk so I'm not blocking traffic, and I email myself constantly all day long.
Ooh, yes.
Just like thought, capture it just into my inbox.
Mm-hmm.
So then I'm in a circumstance where it's in a place where it's not going to be lost, so my head isn't trying to hold on to it. And I know that I can then go back and gather them and move them into the place where all of my thoughts are being gathered. So when it comes time for me to sit down and do work, I can go, great, these are the 6 thoughts that I had over the course of the last few days. This is the one that I'm going to start with today.
Perfect. Yes.
Excellent. I hope you enjoyed that conversation and learned along the way like I did. If you would like more information about Joan, the work she is doing, and her podcast, all you need to do is go to tappingpodcast.com, click on the link for episode 357. That's tappingpodcast.com. Click on the link for episode 357. If you happen to be listening to this in the website, below the player, you can see all of Joan's contact information and how you can find out more about her and listen to her podcast as well. If there's someone in your life who could use this information, please be our ambassador. Pass it along. You don't have to spam your inbox and send it to everybody in the world. But if you know someone in your life who could benefit from something like this, it would mean the world to me if you passed it along to them. The fastest way and the easiest way for someone to find a new listening experience is the recommendation of a friend. So you passing it along is going to make their life better. And like I said earlier, when we have people tapping regularly and we have people being transformed, it makes a huge difference to all of us. So share this with someone who it would be useful for them today. If you have a question, if you have a comment, if you have someone you think I should interview or a topic I should cover, just like happened today, please let me know. Gene, Gene, at tappingqanda.com. I love hearing from you. Or if you're on the website, just click on that contact link, and I would love to hear your suggestions. For the Tapping Q&A podcast, this is Gene Montrestelli. I hope you have a great day, and I will talk to you real soon. Bye-bye. The Tapping Q&A podcast is copyright Gene Montrestelli, Tapping Q&A 2016. All views expressed by guests are those of the guests and not necessarily of Gene Montrestelli or Tapping Q&A.